Have you ever felt like someone knew too much about you? Like hearing your own name coming from the mouth of a person you had never seen before, never met, and yet, somehow, they sounded familiar with your life. Before I begin this story, I want you to write in the comments where you're listening from, your city, your state, your country, because so often we believe certain pains happen only to us, but when we look around, we realize there are women everywhere living stories that mirror ours, marked by the same wounds, the same silences, the same shock that a single sentence or an unexpected phone call can bring. And today, I need to share with you the very first sign of something that would change my life in a way I could never have predicted. I remember that day as if it were happening right now. There was no omen in the air, no supernatural hint, no extraordinary moment suggesting that my life was about to flip upside down. It was an ordinary day, maybe even boring, the kind where you assume nothing unusual could possibly happen. I was busy with my chores, lost in my usual routine, that kind of routine that swallows us whole without asking permission. Then the phone rang, a number I didn't recognize, but one that didn't alert me either. I answered, thinking it was another automated call, another bill reminder, another endless promotion. But on the other end, the silence lasted too long. And beneath that silence, I felt something I couldn't name right away. When the woman finally spoke, her voice came out low, almost as if she were afraid someone other than me might hear. But what truly disarmed me was that she called me by my name. She didn't stutter, didn't hesitate, didn't ask if it was me. She stated it, and in that instant, I realized that this person wasn't some accidental stranger. She knew exactly who I was, exactly who she was calling, and that alone shook me. We spend our lives believing we know who stands beside us, believing we at least understand where certain information could come from. But when someone you've never met speaks your name with the certainty of someone who's been watching you for a long time, something inside you wakes up, tightens, protects itself. She knew my name. She knew my routine, and she knew my husband. I didn't say anything right away. My breath caught in my throat because there was something in her tone that had nothing to do with gossip, curiosity, or cruelty. It was as if she were carrying a weight too heavy to keep inside. And even before I understood why she was calling, I felt that this woman was about to hand me a key capable of opening doors I didn't even know existed, doors I might never have wanted to open. But life has its own timing. When the moment arrives, nothing can stop the inevitable. She tried to continue speaking, but her voice wavered. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't manipulation. It was fear. Fear of me. Fear of herself. Fear of the truth she was holding. I recognized that. Fear because I felt something similar many times, in completely different situations. It's the kind of fear that shows up when you know you're about to do something that can't be undone. Something that will hurt someone, something that frees one part of you and traps another. And that was exactly the kind of fear I heard in her breathing. I closed my eyes and listened without interrupting. I wanted to understand who this woman was and why, out of all the people in the world, she chose to speak to me. It wasn't just her voice trembling. There was something trembling in the air between us, a vibration that seemed to warn me that whatever I was about to hear would slice through my chest like a slow, deep, irreversible blow. She said she needed to tell me something. Just that. And even those simple words carried a strange heaviness, because no one calls a complete stranger and says they need to tell them something unless that something is enormous. You can feel when life is preparing to tell you a truth you've been avoiding. And in that moment, even without knowing anything yet, I felt it. I felt something coming. I felt life preparing to hand me a truth that didn't need my permission to be born. I took a deep breath and prepared myself to listen. I didn't know it then, but that would become the first step of an unexpected journey, a journey that began with a stranger saying my name and would end with secrets being revealed that were right in front of me all along, hidden. Beneath the routine I fought so hard to maintain, what she carried in her voice wasn't just information. It was the seed of a revelation about my husband, about me, about everything I believed I understood. And that's why, before I continue, I want you to write in the comments where you are listening from, because this story isn't just mine. It echoes through the lives of women everywhere, Women who've felt that something was wrong, women who've received unexpected signs, women who've heard life call their names through the voice of someone they never imagined. And that's how it began, without warning. But what came after, even I wasn't prepared to face. I could hear that woman breathing like someone carrying a secret too heavy to hold alone, one that burned inside her and needed an escape. Her voice shook, not just from fear of what I might think, but from guilt. Guilt that sounded as if it had weight, as if it pressed against her chest every time she tried to speak. It was as though every word got stuck in her throat, begging for permission to come out, yet terrified of the consequences. I heard that deep tremor, a fear that wasn't about me, but about what the truth could unleash. And right there, in that hesitation, I understood she wasn't calling out of impulse or curiosity. She was calling because whatever she had been living had already pushed her far past an emotional limit. She tried to begin, but even her breathing betrayed how painful it would be. She wasn't a woman trying to ruin a marriage. She wasn't someone wanting to gain anything from this. It was the opposite. She sounded like someone about to lose something, lose her peace, lose control over her own story, lose what little dignity she had left after getting involved in something she should never have touched. She couldn't hide her remorse, a remorse that crossed the phone line with the weight of something physical. And when she said again that she needed to tell me something, I knew that the word needed wasn't casual. It was a moral burden, an emotional burden, a spiritual burden. It was a necessity born from guilt and desperation, something she had avoided for months, maybe years, until she couldn't carry it anymore. What struck me wasn't what she said, but how she said it. There was a strange kind of care in her tone, a care that didn't match someone trying to cause chaos. She spoke my name with a discomforted gentleness, with a kind of respect that came from understanding she was about to cause pain she never intended to cause. And that shook me in a way I can't explain, because women recognize one another's pain long before it's spoken. There's an unspoken code among us, an ancestral understanding that lets us sense when another woman is about to collapse. And that woman's voice was standing right at the edge of collapse. She asked me not to interrupt, and even without understanding anything yet, I knew I shouldn't. Her tone told me that if I stopped her, if I cut her off, she might fall apart completely. I took a breath and let her continue, even though every second of silence felt like reality stretching in slow motion around us. She tried to line up her words, but it was as though she were wrestling with them, as if every letter were a blade she had to hold with her bare hands. And I felt, deeply, that the truth she carried wasn't small. It was big, big enough to make a woman tremble, hesitate, cry without tears. She said she knew who I was. She said she knew who my husband was. And when she spoke his name, her voice simply broke, not out of disrespect, out of pain, out of regret, the kind of break that comes from someone who never wanted to be involved in another woman's life, yet ended up trapped in a story she never consciously chose. With every word, I realized she wasn't my enemy. The enemy was somewhere else, or rather, in someone else. Still, my chest tightened, because hearing the name of someone you love coming from the mouth of a stranger opens wounds in layers you didn't even know existed. And the way she said his name wasn't the way you speak of a stranger. It was the way you speak of someone present, someone who had been part of your life, someone who left a mark, the kind of mark that should never exist, the kind of mark born from a mistake, an illusion, a false promise. She said she was afraid to tell me because she didn't know how I would react. She was afraid I'd think she was making it all up, afraid of seeming cruel, afraid of telling the truth and destroying something that I might not have even realized was already broken. Her fear was almost tangible. I could feel it in the way her voice hurried and slowed at the same time, as if she were trying to speed up what needed to be said, and at the same time wishing those words never had to leave her mouth. And the more she spoke, the more I understood that this phone call wasn't just about a revelation. It was about a woman trying to reclaim her own conscience, trying to free herself from a story she never should have been part of, trying, finally, to return the truth to the person who should have owned it all along. She told me she couldn't live with that weight in her chest anymore. And I understood. Because some truths make us sick when we bury them for too long. She hesitated again. And in that moment, I felt clearly that she wasn't fighting me. She wasn't fighting reality. She was fighting herself, fighting the version of herself she had allowed to exist during that chapter of her life. I realized this wasn't a call of attack. It was a call of desperation. It was the call of someone who finally understood the depth of the consequences of her own choices, someone who wanted, in some way, to repair the damage she helped create. I noticed that when she said my name, there was a mix of respect and shame, and that combination is rare. It's the kind of mix that appears only when a woman feels downgraded by her own conscience, when she knows that even if there are two guilty parties, she's the only one with the courage to tell the truth. And in that moment, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not yet. I felt a kind of intuition, an ancient whisper, the kind that feels like the voice of every woman before me, warning that what I was about to hear would change everything. She took a deep breath, and I could almost feel the heavy air crossing the phone line. I knew that whatever she would say next would be the beginning of a wound, one of those that don't close quickly. And maybe that's why my heart started beating faster, as if my body understood the pain before the words arrived. But I didn't interrupt her. I let her find strength inside her trembling voice, because sometimes the truth needs to be spoken by the one who did wrong, not the one who suffered. And she, in that moment, seemed ready to finally face what she had avoided for so long. And before she continued, I want you who is listening to this story right now to write in the comments, "I'm here, listening to every word." Write it to show that you're present, attentive, connected to this story, because this story belongs to many women, many more than you imagine. And while she gathered courage to move forward, I felt something you need to understand as well. When the truth is about to be revealed, the air changes, the energy shifts, the silence deepens. And that was exactly what was happening between us at that moment. And if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, subscribe now. Don't wait. Here, you find real stories, stories that look like your own, stories that reveal hidden truths, stories that heal, stories that open your eyes when the world tries to shut them. If you want strength, clarity, courage, and wisdom to recognize what many try to hide from you, you need to be part of this space. Hit the subscribe button now, because what you're going to hear next can transform the way you see relationships, trust, and self-worth. I listened to that woman breathing on the other end of the line while my mind drifted back, almost without my permission, to all the years of marriage I spent believing I was safe. It's strange how memory chooses the exact moments that hurt most to resurface, almost as if it were trying to show me that I had seen everything before, but refused to acknowledge it. And as she gathered strength to reveal the rest of the truth, I began revisiting, inside myself, the marriage I thought I had, that seemingly solid life I defended, like someone guarding a home built with her own hands. I had always believed my marriage was stable, the kind that withstands time, exhaustion, and differences. I spoke of it with pride, with the confidence only someone who deeply believes in another person can have. I repeated to myself that we had trust, partnership, communication, that we faced challenges as a team, and that was exactly the image I wanted to protect. The image of a mature love, love built with patience, routine, affection, and respect. I remember how many times I defended that man to others, how many times I said he was different, that with me he was present, honest, transparent, and the truth is, all I ever saw was the surface he wanted me to see. When I think back to that time, I realize my heart always believed more than my eyes could see. I trusted so deeply in the idea of us that I ignored small signs that today feel painfully obvious but that back then I justified, explained away, or pushed aside. Signs I hid even from myself, because holding on to the illusion of a perfect marriage was easier than facing the possibility that something was wrong. And now, listening to that woman's remorseful voice, I realized that my denial also played a role in this puzzle, because often the truth stands right in front of us, and even then, we choose not to see it. He had always been affectionate, always attentive, always saying the right words to calm me. When I questioned something, when I pointed out small changes in his behavior, he would hug me, smile, and tell me I was tired, that I needed to relax. that life was already heavy enough for me to worry about nonsense. And I believed him. I believed because it was easier to trust him than to trust the intuition whispering inside me. I remember so many nights lying beside him, thinking we were living a beautiful story, while, in reality, the real story was happening far away from my eyes. He began coming home late more often, but he always had a calm, logical explanation. Too much work, too much traffic, too much exhaustion, an unexpected task, a meeting that ran late, and I, wanting to keep the peace, accepted it all, because that's what I thought a good wife was supposed to do. I told myself that men get tired, men get overwhelmed, men need space, and slowly, without realizing it, I started giving in pieces of myself, giving in my own intuition, giving in the inner voice that tried to warn me. The small signs started so subtly that if I weren't reliving everything now, I might not even remember them. But the truth is, they were there. The phone placed face down, the longer showers, the different perfume on an ordinary day, the sudden impatience, the lack of interest in conversations that once flowed so naturally, the distant look in the middle of our routine, the excuse of being too tired to talk, too tired to listen, too tired to even exist inside. The relationship. Back then, everything seemed so small, so easy to explain away. But now I see it wasn't small at all. It was the beginning of a storm I refused to predict. He said I was exaggerating. He said I was seeing things that weren't there. He said I was being too sensitive. And I accepted those words as if they were truths, because when you love someone deeply, you choose to believe, you choose to trust, and that choice, when made with a pure heart, can become the very reason you fall. He knew exactly how to calm me down, how to pull me in, how to convince me, and I, wanting to keep the peace, let things slide. But now, listening to that woman, destroyed by her own regret, I understood that my marriage had cracks long before that call, cracks that were there, silent, hidden between smiles and pretty words, waiting for the perfect moment to burst open. And it's painful to realize that while I thought I was living a relationship built on partnership and devotion, he was living something completely different. And maybe that's why it hurt so deeply to hear that trembling female voice, choking on her own guilt, fighting to tell me something I didn't know yet, something my heart already suspected. My breathing shifted as she tried to continue her story. It was as if each sentence pulled out of me memories I never wanted to revisit, and still, there I was, facing them again. I remembered the times he disappeared for hours and returned with explanations that were just a little too perfect. I remembered the moments when he seemed distracted, as if living two lives at once. I remembered conversations that ended too quickly, hugs that grew too cold, promises that sounded too beautiful to be true. And now, everything made sense. Too much sense. She took another deep breath, and I kept listening, because despite everything, there was something inevitable about that call, as if the truth had finally decided it was ready to reveal itself completely. And before she went on, I want you to write in the comments, "I've seen the signs and didn't want to see them." That sentence may seem simple, but it's a silent embrace among women who've lived through this. And when you share it, you help other women understand they're not alone, because none of us are. And as she tried to gather courage to move forward, I understood, more clearly with every breath, that my perfect marriage before the storm was perfect only in my mind. And from that moment on, the reality I knew was about to unravel in ways I never could have imagined. But I had to listen to the end, because the truth, no matter how painful, always arrives, and it was closer than ever. I heard that woman inhale deeply on the other end, as if gathering the last strength she had left to say something that could tear me apart inside. And in that tense, heavy silence, the kind that squeezes the air between two people, I felt the truth preparing to come out, even if it cost us both. She seemed to wrestle with the words, as if each one had thorns tearing her apart before they reached my ears. When she finally spoke, her voice came out low, cracked, soaked in guilt. She said she needed to be honest with me, that she couldn't hide it anymore, that she couldn't keep living with that weight. And then, without circling around it, without softening it, without trying to comfort herself, she said the words that changed everything. She had been involved with my husband. Those words hit me like a cold blade, the kind that doesn't hurt right away, but you know the pain will come and it will stay. I went still, not because I didn't understand, but because deep down, a part of me already knew. Sometimes the body knows before the mind. Sometimes the heart understands before reason catches up. And in that moment, all the intuition I ignored for months came crashing back like waves from a tide I tried to stop with my bare hands. Still, hearing that confirmation from another woman, hearing that confession, delivered with that much pain, broke through me in a way I couldn't undo. She said she didn't want to hurt me, but the involvement happened. It wasn't a quick mistake. It wasn't a passing error. It wasn't a short story. It was something built, something he nurtured, something he kept alive while sharing a bed with me, drinking coffee with me, looking into my eyes and telling me he loved me. But as painful as it was to hear that they'd been involved, that wasn't what cut the deepest. The real wound came when she started telling me how he described me. That's when the truth becomes unbearable. That's when the mask falls off completely. The way a man speaks about his wife when she isn't around says far more about who he really is than anything he says inside his home. And for the first time, I heard my life described by the mouth of a stranger. She said he spoke of me like I was a burden in his life. He said I was cold. He said I was distant. He said I didn't appreciate him. He said I didn't recognize his effort. He said I was too emotional, too demanding, too critical. Everything he never said to me, he said to her. And hearing that made something shake inside me, not just because of the betrayal, but because of the cruelty. Because cheating is one thing, but belittling someone who loves you, just to play the victim, is something else entirely. She kept talking, and I listened to every word as if being forced to flip through a diary I didn't write, but one that used my life, twisted and rewritten. He invented conflicts that never existed. He exaggerated small situations. He turned my pain into flaws, my vulnerabilities into reasons for shame. He made me smaller so he could feel bigger. He said he was unhappy, trapped, deserving of something better. And she, believing him, allowed herself to be pulled in, allowed herself to fall. But now, full of regret, she wanted me to know that everything he said was calculated, crafted, shaped to meet his desires, and that revelation wasn't just painful, it was enlightening. Because in that moment, I saw something clearly that took me years to recognize. He had always been a great actor. Not with me, with the world. She tried to hold back tears and told me that over time, she began to notice something was off, that he changed his stories depending on the day, that things didn't add up, that the math of his life didn't make sense. And it was that growing discomfort that made her start looking me up, looking us up, until she discovered what our marriage really was. She confessed that when she realized he was lying to both of us, something inside her shattered. And after that, she spent weeks debating whether to tell me or disappear completely. But with each passing day, her conscience grew heavier. She said she regretted believing him, regretted getting involved, regretted letting someone manipulate her emotions while using my life as a tool. And I listened in silence. Because sometimes the pain is so big, it has nowhere to go. It just sits there, burning like an ember inside your chest. And while she spoke, I felt not only the pain of betrayal, but the pain of realizing the man I loved was nothing like the image I created. He didn't describe me as a woman. He described me as a problem, not as a wife, as a burden. And no woman should ever have to hear that. It's like he ripped my identity away and replaced it with a lie. One created to justify his own cowardice. She went on to tell me details, specific phrases, moments, secrets he shared with her, secrets he never shared with me. She said he talked about my pain as if it were childish complaining. He spoke of my strength as if it were arrogance. He spoke of my independence as if it were a threat. He twisted my love into something demanding. And that, more than anything, created a deep silence inside me. Because in that moment, I understood he hadn't betrayed me only with his body. He betrayed me with the story he told. He betrayed me with his words. He betrayed me with the version of me he sold to others. He erased me from my own narrative and rewrote it however he wanted, for whoever he wanted. And as she confessed everything, I felt a mix of shock, indignation, and a strange kind of clarity. like each word she spoke was another brick falling from a wall I had spent years building and keeping perfectly intact. And the more she talked, the clearer it became that this man was not who I thought he was, not who I defended, not who I believed I knew. He was a character molded for every situation, for every woman, for every need. And that hurt more than any physical betrayal. Because when someone destroys your trust, you suffer. But when someone destroys the version of you that you believed existed inside them, you lose something far deeper. And before she continued, I want you to write in the comments, "The truth was right in front of me." That sentence is a quiet acknowledgement of our own journeys, of the times we ignored signs, excuses, poorly told stories, believing we were protected inside a love that no longer existed, or maybe never existed at all. Those words, written by you, may reach another woman listening right now who hasn't yet found the strength to admit what she already knows. She paused for a long moment, took another breath, and I knew there was more, much more, because the truth rarely comes all at once. It comes in pieces, like waves, each one bringing a part of the pain, a part of the awareness, a part of the freedom. And I knew that what she was about to say next wouldn't be any lighter, but I needed to hear it, because at that point, I already understood that nothing would ever be the same, and that the story I thought I was living wasn't the real one. It was only the first chapter of something much bigger waiting to be revealed. I stayed there, holding the phone tightly, while inside me everything collapsed in silence. Her voice echoed in my mind as I tried to understand how all of this had happened right in front of my eyes without me noticing. But something inside me shifted in that instant. The pain didn't erase anything, but it sparked something I hadn't felt in a long time. The need to know the whole truth, not the truth he told, not the truth I imagined, the real truth, raw, unfiltered, unmanipulated. And that was the moment my investigation began, even though I hadn't said a single word to her. On the outside, I was silent. On the inside, I was connecting dots, revisiting memories, reorganizing everything I had lived in a way I never had before. When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. And that's exactly how many women become strong. In silence. In the silence that observes. The silence that thinks. The silence that decides. I took a deep breath and let the pain move through me without paralyzing me. Because now I knew I couldn't trust anything he said. From that moment on, every detail, every gesture, every word he spoke would become a piece of a puzzle I needed to put together. And I was ready to look into places I once avoided, ready to find things I once feared. But most importantly, I was ready to listen to myself, something I'd stopped doing for far too long. The first thing I did was pick up his phone, and before I continue, write in the comments, "I've known when I needed to look for the truth." This isn't just a confession. It's a recognition of the courage so many women discover when their hearts sense that something is wrong. It helps other women realize they aren't alone on this hard road. I picked up his phone while he slept. I knew the passwords, of course. He always made a point of saying he had nothing to hide. But now I understood that was just part of his performance. Still, the phone unlocked easily. And there, that glowing screen in the dark room, I began to see the parallel life he'd been living while looking at me as if nothing were happening. He deleted messages, but not completely. You know when someone thinks they're being careful but always leaves traces? He wasn't nearly as clever as he believed. There were partially deleted histories, conversations saved on other apps, photos hidden in renamed folders. And as I swiped through the screen, the truth began to appear piece by piece, forming a timeline I had never seen, but that had always existed as part of my life. I found short messages marking meetups. I found conversations that started neutral and ended with empty promises he never made to me. I saw photos from places he claimed to be alone, but he wasn't. I discovered that his late nights followed predictable patterns that lined up perfectly with all the excuses he used. I found digital receipts, unexplained payments, small repeated transactions that formed a pattern I had never noticed before. And each detail confirmed that the woman's call wasn't just true. It was only the tip of the iceberg. With each new discovery, I felt a mix of outrage and clarity. Outrage for everything I was seeing, clarity for finally seeing something that had been right in front of me for so long. I realized how he always manipulated the story, how he always managed to twist every one of my questions, turning my suspicions into insecurity, my fears into exaggeration, my intuition into paranoia. And now, seeing everything clearly, I understood something else. He didn't just underestimate my trust, he underestimated my intelligence. I found photos from trips where he claimed to be working, but where I could see feminine objects reflected in the background. I found old emails with reservations at places we'd never been together, archived messages in apps he swore he didn't use anymore, little confessions to friends about a difficult phase in the marriage, as if I were the problem, as if I were the reason he needed someone else. And the more I read, the more I understood something important. He was never a victim of anything. He was the architect of his own lies. The truth was scattered everywhere. It wasn't one big revelation hidden in a dark corner. It was a mosaic of small lies, small gaps, small details that, together, formed a deep abyss. And the deeper that abyss became, the stronger I felt. Because the truth can hurt, and hurt badly, but it also sets you free. Free from illusion, free from fantasy, free from the emotional imprisonment that comes when you love someone more than they deserve. I began connecting each detail to the stories he had told me, and I realized how everything fit together in a way I never wanted to see before. The mood swings, the distancing, the days he seemed absent even while sitting in front of me, the nights he was too exhausted to talk, the weekends he needed to take care of something urgent. Now everything made sense. I saw how he built two lives, two identities, two versions of himself, and because I loved the version he showed me, I never imagined the other one existed. And as I kept going, I stopped being just a wounded wife. I became something much stronger, the silent avenger, the woman who observes everything, breathes deeply, thinks before acting, gathers the pieces without making noise, without falling apart, without begging for explanations he would never give. That strength doesn't come from hatred, it comes from awakening, from the moment a woman stops believing the lie and starts walking side by side with the truth. I continued, investigating in silence, absolute silence, because the silence of a wounded woman is dangerous for the one who hurt her, but sacred for the woman who is ready to be reborn. And I knew that if I wanted to understand everything, I had to keep that silence. Every step I took revealed another layer of his deception, and I realized the truth wasn't only in the messages. It was in the timestamps, in the receipts, in the deleted fragments, in the repeated patterns, in the contradictions that once looked insignificant but now screamed at me. And before I go on, write in the comments, I choose the truth. It's not just a sentence. It's an emotional stance. It's a flag raised by every woman who's tired of living on the edges of someone else's lies. It's the courage to admit that when the truth arrives, it's never late. I still had so much to uncover, and the more I dug, the more the truth seemed to find me, as if it had been waiting for this moment for a long time, because truth has a force of its own, and when it decides to show itself, nothing holds it back, not even an entire marriage built on illusions. I stayed there with all those truths spread before me like shards of glass I had tried to keep whole for far too long. And in that moment, I understood something important. Running to him wouldn't change anything. Asking for explanations wouldn't change anything. Demanding honesty wouldn't change anything. Because the real confrontation, the one that truly wounds, doesn't happen with the person who betrayed you. It happens inside you. It happens when you're forced to look in the mirror and admit everything you tried to ignore, everything you silenced, everything you normalized, just to protect the illusion of peace. And that kind of confrontation hurts more than any truth spoken by another woman, because it forces you to revisit parts of yourself that had been asleep, hidden, suffocated. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone with all the evidence I had found, and the silence in that room was louder than any scream. It was there, alone, that I faced something I had avoided for years, the way I shrank myself so he could stand taller, the way I lowered my head so he wouldn't feel confronted, the way I accepted the minimum while offering the maximum. And as I breathed deeply, I realized that the marriage I fought so hard to protect had been breaking long before the betrayal, Not because of one single act, but because of tiny doses of disrespect I swallowed to avoid conflict. I began remembering every moment my intuition tried to speak to me, every time my heart raced without reason, every time I felt that uncomfortable pinch that I labeled exhaustion, stress, or worry. And right there, I admitted, truly admitted, for the first time, that he wasn't the only one who had lied to me. I had lied to myself too. Lied when I said he would never do something like this. Lied when I tried to justify the unjustifiable. Lied when I accepted explanations that never added up. And that part hurt, because facing the truth about who you allowed someone to become in your life is far harder than facing the truth about what they did. I found myself staring at my own reflection, an inner mirror, realizing how far I had drifted from myself without noticing. I saw how I stopped taking care of my own heart to take care of his, how I stopped listening to my intuition to listen to his excuses, how I stopped looking at myself with kindness because I spent too much time looking at him with admiration. Seeing that so clearly felt like taking a blow straight to the soul. I didn't want to admit it, but I had to. I had been so busy sustaining that relationship that I forgot to sustain myself. I forgot to protect myself. I forgot to prioritize myself. And while looking into that imaginary mirror inside my chest, I began asking questions I never had the courage to ask. I asked myself why I accepted so little, why I was so afraid of being alone, why I believed love meant suffering in silence, forgiving automatically, always yielding. I asked myself when I confused love with habit, routine with commitment, physical presence with emotional connection. And these questions weren't empty spirals, they were wounds being cleaned. It stung, but it freed me. I remembered all the times I held back what I felt so I wouldn't create tension. The times I accepted weak excuses because I didn't want to argue. The times he belittled me with little jokes and I pretended it didn't bother me. The times I dressed up beautifully and he didn't even notice, and I told myself it didn't matter. I remembered how I chipped away at myself, piece by piece, until all that remained was a version of me that survived but no longer lived. And admitting that was as painful as discovering the betrayal. The truth is, the most brutal confrontation isn't with the man who hurts you. It's with the woman you became, trying to keep someone who never deserved to stay. And in that moment, I realized the size of my light and how much I had allowed it to be dimmed. I realized the depth of my strength and how I had used it to carry someone who would never catch me if I fell. And that clarity, even drenched in pain, began bringing me back to myself. I closed my eyes and felt a mix of anger, sadness, and clarity. Anger for everything he did, sadness for everything I allowed, clarity for finally understanding that the love I poured out so freely needed to return to me. And I knew this process wouldn't be easy. I knew there was still so much left to hear, to discover, to confront, but I also knew something else. For the first time in a long time, I felt something he never imagined I would feel: power. The power that rises when a wounded woman finally decides to see what's in front of her without fear, without excuses, without hiding behind illusions. And before I continue this story, write in the comments, I deserve the truth. It's not just a phrase for engagement. It's a declaration, a reminder, a pact you make with yourself. Because when you write that, you're claiming that you will never again settle for crumbs, never again accept lies wrapped in affection, never again allow anyone to write your story for you. I took a deep breath, still holding all the evidence, all the truths, all the wounds that had just been opened. And as I felt the weight of my own reflection, I knew the next step was inevitable. Because once a woman awakens, nothing puts her back to sleep. And I was more awake than I had ever been in my life. I waited for morning the way someone waits for a storm to announce its first thunder. There was no room left for doubt, for excuses, for the sweet lies he always knew how to craft. The truth was there, echoing inside me, impossible to ignore. And when the sun began to rise, lighting up the house where I had fought so hard to keep peace, I felt a steadiness inside me I had never felt before. It wasn't impulsiveness. It wasn't rage. It was clarity. A clarity that comes when the woman who once believed in promises finally wakes up to reality. And I knew that day would be the day of truth. He woke up as if nothing was happening, stretching, talking about work, asking about my night. I simply watched. And in that quiet observation, I realized something terrifying. How comfortable he was inside his own lie. How effortlessly he moved within a world he built himself. He had no idea I had discovered everything. No idea I had spoken to the other woman. No idea his carefully constructed world was seconds away from collapsing. And watching that, the enemy moving like he was safe, only strengthened something inside me. I let him finish his breakfast. I let him believe this day would be like all the others. And when he settled into the living room, ready to grab his keys and leave, as he always did whenever he wanted to control the timing and the narrative, I walked toward him and said 2 words. "Sit down." He looked at me confused, and I repeated it, this time with a firmness I didn't even know I possessed. "Sit down." He obeyed. Not because he respected me, but because, maybe for the first time, he sensed something different in my eyes. I sat down in front of him, placed the phone on the table, and drew a slow, steady breath. There was no tremor in my voice, no panic, no desperation. There was a calm only the truth can give. I looked him straight in the eyes that once captivated me and so many other times deceived me. And I said the one sentence he never imagined he'd hear from me. "I already know everything." The moment those words left my mouth, I watched his face change. It's astonishing how a person tries to cling to control, even when the ground is crumbling beneath them. He forced a nervous smile, pretended not to understand, tried to deflect, tried to minimize. He asked what I was talking about, as if he still had a chance to manipulate the situation. But I didn't fall for it, not this time. I turned the phone toward him and let every message, every photo, every piece of evidence speak for me. The silence that settled between us was heavy with years of accumulated lies. He stared at the proof and did exactly what men like him do when caught. He denied as if denial could erase reality, denied as if I were naive, denied as if the truth wasn't right there in front of us. He shook his head, tried to come up with last-minute explanations, said things were fabricated, said I misunderstood, said I was seeing it all wrong, and I just watched him, like a woman who had finally learned how to see. When he realized denial wasn't working, he shifted strategies. He raised his voice, trying to flip the narrative, trying to make me look irrational, tried to tell me I was overreacting, that I was imagining things, that I was being unfair. And still, I remained unmoved. He didn't understand that when a woman reaches this point, nothing shakes her anymore. Nothing breaks her. Nothing makes her retreat. Because the pain has already burned everything it needed to burn. Now only strength remains. When the attack didn't work, he tried the third tactic, tears. He cried as if he were heartbroken, as if he were the victim, as if I were the one tearing apart something he had worked so hard to protect. He covered his face with his hands, sniffled, tried to get close to me, tried to hold my hands, tried to hug me, but I stayed firm, because I knew those tears weren't remorse. They were panic. They were the silent scream of someone realizing they had lost control. And when he saw that crying wouldn't change anything, he finally confessed. Not because he sought redemption, but because he had no other escape. He admitted the affair, admitted the meetings, admitted the other woman existed long before I ever suspected, admitted he lied to both of us, admitted he manipulated situations, admitted he recreated a distorted version of me to justify his own choices. But even while confessing, he tried to twist the blame, tried to convince me that the betrayal happened because of some flaw in me. I let him talk. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to rewrite reality. I let him empty his soul of all the pathetic excuses men like him always invent. And when he was done, I took a deep breath, lifted my head, and felt something inside me shift completely. I was no longer afraid, no longer doubtful, no longer tempted to believe any of it. All I felt was peace, because when the truth finally arrives in full, peace comes with it, even if it's a sad peace, a wounded peace, a peace that doesn't erase the pain, but lights your path. I knew that moment marked a turning point. I knew nothing would ever be the same. I knew he no longer had any power over me, and for the first time in many years, I felt whole. And before I continue this story, write in the comments, "I won't fall for it anymore," because when you write that, you're declaring you see through every manipulation, every excuse, every emotional crumb. You're declaring that you woke up, that you reclaimed yourself, that you took back the narrative. I looked at him one last time in that moment and realized the end had already begun. Not when he betrayed me, but when I finally chose to see. And it was only the beginning of what was still coming. I kept looking at him after everything had been said, and the silence between us felt like a deep canyon. A canyon he dug, himself, day after day, lie after lie, while I desperately tried to build bridges. But in that moment, something inside me finally understood. I didn't have to cross any bridge anymore. I didn't have to save anything. I didn't have to carry a man who would never carry me. And that's when the moral revenge began. Not as an explosion, not as a scandal, not as an act of anger, but as a calm, clear, luminous decision. The decision to set myself free. He kept talking, trying to patch something already beyond repair, trying with tears, with explanations, with desperate swearing, with promises of change. But once a woman truly wakes up, no argument can put her back to sleep. I felt a serenity inside me he never imagined I was capable of. A serenity that dismantled every tactic he had used for so long to keep me emotionally trapped, confused, dependent on his narrative. I realized the greatest power a woman can show isn't in her scream. It's in her calm. The calm that unnerves. The calm that disarms. The calm that ends things. I stood up slowly, and when he realized I was stepping out of the emotional space where he'd kept me for years, he panicked. It's always like that. When they sense they've lost control over the woman they once held with sweet words and rotten actions, the mask falls completely. He tried to grab my arm, tried to hold me back, but I pulled away with the strength of someone who finally understands her own worth. And that simple movement, so small, made his heart race. Because in that moment, he saw he no longer had any power over me. I went to the bedroom, grabbed my purse, my documents, the essentials. Every step I took through that house echoed like a silent announcement that he had lost. And it wasn't a physical loss. It was deeper. He lost psychological access, lost the privilege of my presence, lost the advantage of having me as his emotional safety net, lost the right to call himself a partner when he never acted like one. When I returned to the living room, he sat with his hands on his face, breathing fast, like someone trying to stop an entire double life from collapsing at once. I looked at him with a calm I didn't know I possessed, and before saying a word, I understood something profound. Moral revenge happens in the moment a woman realizes that his abandonment was her deliverance. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to hurt him. I didn't need to prove anything. My leaving would be the final blow, the invisible wound he'd feel. For years, maybe for the rest of his life, because nothing hurts a manipulator more than losing the ability to manipulate. I said only what needed to be said. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I didn't retaliate. I simply declared the end. And when those words left my mouth, he froze, shocked that I had the courage. But the truth is, the courage was always there. He just never believed I had it. Men like him think that if they control a woman's heart long enough, she will never walk away. They underestimate awakening. They underestimate limits. They underestimate the moment patience dies. And when the end comes, it comes all at once. I walked toward the door, and that's when he finally stood up, desperate, insisting I was overreacting, that it was just a phase, that we could get through it. He even dared to say I should forgive him, as if forgiveness were my obligation. And right there, my soul smiled, because I realized he still didn't understand. My leaving wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. I wasn't punishing him. I was saving myself. When I opened the door, I felt the fresh air outside touch my face, as if the universe itself were giving me a sign, telling me that this was the first real breath I had taken in a long time. I stepped out, and something shifted inside me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't fear. It was freedom. A freedom so deep it almost brought me to tears. And that's when I understood that moral revenge doesn't need shouting, humiliation, or an audience. The real revenge lives in the silence of the woman who rises and walks away. As I went down the stairs, my phone vibrated. It was a message from the other woman. And the irony of it all is that, in the end, she wasn't the reason for the destruction. She was the instrument of my liberation. She wrote saying that, despite her mistakes, she felt relieved that I finally knew the truth. She said I deserved someone who saw me, respected me, someone who didn't need two lives to feed a fragile ego. And as I read her words, I realized she was being honest, not to excuse herself, but to help me move forward. And strangely enough, that brought me peace, because I understood that not every woman involved in a betrayal is my enemy. Sometimes, she's just another victim of the same lie I lived. I kept walking, feeling my body grow lighter with each step. I knew the emotional storm hadn't fully passed yet. I knew the pain would come, the longing for what never truly existed, the mourning for a marriage I had tried to save alone. But I also knew that for the first time, I was walking for myself, and that feeling, that strength, that clarity, is something no man can ever take away. And before moving on to the next part of this story, write in the comments, "I choose my freedom." This sentence has power, has healing, has rebirth, because writing it is declaring that you, too, deserve to leave places that hurt you. It's declaring that you were not born to be anyone's second choice. It's declaring that you understand your peace is worth more than any relationship. I kept walking without looking back, because when a woman finally understands who she is, the past stops being a prison and becomes nothing more than a lesson. And there, as I walked away from that house, I knew the story wasn't over, but I also knew that for the first time, I would be the protagonist of my own life. I walked away from that old life, feeling each step hit the ground like a silent announcement of rebirth. The pain still burned, yes, but in a different way. It was no longer the kind of pain that suffocates, humiliates, traps. It was a pain that teaches, a pain that clears space, a pain that prepares the soil for something new to grow. And as I breathed deeply, letting the wind lift the weight of everything I had discovered, I realized that his betrayal, as cruel as it was, hadn't destroyed me. On the contrary, it had revealed me. Truth, when it arrives, doesn't come to crush us. It comes to free us, to free us from illusion, from fear, from the burden of carrying people who never intended to walk beside us. I realized that the love I gave was not a loss. It was a seed that allowed the woman inside me to finally awaken. And that awakening was my greatest gift, because when a woman returns to herself, the whole world falls back into place. I learned that self-love isn't just about looking in the mirror and thinking you look good. It's about choosing yourself when everything around you tries to convince you to abandon who you are. It's about respecting your limits, your pain, your truth. It's about understanding that you deserve far more than someone who uses you as an emotional crutch while living other lives in the shadows. It's about knowing fidelity is not only physical, it's emotional, spiritual, moral, and that God, one way or another, always reveals what needs to be seen, even if the revelation comes from someone you never expected. I learned that a woman's strength isn't measured by how much she endures, but by the moment she decides to stop carrying what was never hers. And that day, when I closed the door behind me, I wasn't leaving only an unfaithful husband. I was leaving behind the woman I used to be, the woman who tried to please, who tried to sustain, who tried to protect appearances. I was walking toward the woman I should have been all along, whole, steady, aware, wise. And before I close this chapter, write in the comments, "I am reborn today." This sentence isn't just symbolic. It's a declaration of power, a commitment to yourself, a mark of the exact moment you decide you will no longer be defined by the wounds you endured, but by the strong woman you're becoming. Now take a deep breath. Let this story settle in your heart. Allow yourself to reflect on what it awakened in you. And if something inside you shifted while listening to these words, know that this is only the beginning of your own journey. And since you're here, take advantage of this moment, this strength rising in your chest, and watch the next video that's appearing on your screen right now. It brings another powerful story, another revelation of the feminine soul, another chapter of wisdom that may illuminate parts of you that you haven't touched yet. It's not a continuation of this story, but it is another step inside the world of the matriarch secrets, a space created for women seeking truth, healing, clarity, courage, and transformation. Click and keep walking. This path of wisdom, because you deserve every truth that frees you and every story that strengthens you.